Hey, everybody. This episode of Our Kids Play Hockey is brought to you by our title sponsor, NHL Sense Arena. Look, we all want our kids to succeed in hockey, but let's face it, finding training that's both effective and enjoyable can be a real challenge, and not to mention expensive and a total drain on time, especially if you have to drive to the rink, pay a private instructor. There's so many reasons that money gets spent on this game. But that's where NHL Sense Arena steps in. It's a virtual reality training game that brings the rink into your home that takes off-ice training to a new reality. It's designed to improve hockey sense and IQ, something that's lacking majorly in the game today for both players and goalies. And you get unlimited access to over 100 drills and training plans from top coaches and players that can be played anytime, anywhere, with drills approved by USA Hockey player and goalie development directors. Look, improving mental hockey skills at home has really never been more fun, and any hockey player that uses this is going to have a blast. All right. I've used this before on my own, and it feels like you're so immersed in an arena, you sometimes forget you have a headset on. And again, it's not being on the ice, but it allows you to work on some of these skill sets like scanning, as I said before, hockey IQ, looking around the rink, making the right plays, that getting those repetitions in now as a hockey player are super important for your development. So NHL Sense Arena is giving all the listeners an exclusive offer for $50 off an annual plan when you use our code Hockey Never Stops at checkout. Again, that's Hockey Never Stops. All you got to do is go to hockey.sensearena.com. Again, that's hockey.sensearena.com. Use the code Hockey Never Stops, and you'll save $50 on your annual plan of NHL Sense Arena. Make sure to check that out and enjoy this episode of Our Kids Play Hockey. Hey everybody, season's here. So today we're talking about how to keep the competition in the game and make it fun. We talk a lot about hockey has to be fun, and it does. But we go through this episode how to make it competitive and how to make it fun at the start of the season so that you have some of these skill sets throughout the year. So Mike Benelli and I have a great conversation today and give some actionable items that you can add into your practices or conversations you can have with your kids about how to turn that competition or competitive, can't say this, how to turn the competitiveness level up. I did it. I don't know if we're going to keep that, but it's in there now. Also, if you're looking to turn your mental competitiveness up this year, head over to game7group.com. It's spelled out, all three words. And take a look, and you can download our free team building brochure that we put on there. It's a little ebook that has multiple drills for your team for the season. Or if you're looking to go a little bit further into something virtual or in person, you can see all of our options there on how to do some team building exercises or culture building exercises within your team, which is becoming really a mainstay in any successful organization at this point. So again, that's game7group.com. Download the free ebook with all of the drills that I use with all the kids that I coach. Absolutely free. You just have to give up an email. Don't worry, I'm not going to email you every single day and be one of those people in your inbox that's annoying. But this podcast may be, so enjoy Our Kids Play Hockey with me and Mike Benelli now, going over how to keep your teams competitive throughout the entire season. Hello, hockey friends and families around the world, and welcome to another edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. I'm going to start this one with a little bit of a story. I remember that last year, I was always preaching fun. Mike and I are always preaching fun. Christy, Mike, and I are always preaching that hockey has to be fun. And a parent came up to me who listens to the show and kind of correctly said to me, but what about the competition? They got to be competitive. They have to learn how to compete. And I remember I had a little bit of a malfunction because to me, competition is fun. So I understood where she was coming from. She was kind of saying, like, look, everything can't just be sunshine and rainbows all the time. That's kind of how she was taking it. And so we had a really great conversation around, there's a right and wrong way to introduce competition, being competitive, both as an individual, as a teammate, and then how coaches can introduce being competitive. So Mike and I were talking before the episode. You're hearing this right before the season starts. So today we're going to go over kind of the start of season, how to introduce competition in a fun way for your team. And, Mike, before we even dive into it, I want to say one of the things I think people can forget is kids are naturally competitive, whether they're, type A, type B. I was at a showcase with my son yesterday and his team, and we had a little bit of a cookout after one of the games. We were tailgating, and without any prompting, nothing, they started playing wiffle ball. And I was listening to them, and it was a little bit Lord of the Flies, like it was funny, but they were competing, and that's a strike. Get up, I'm up to bet. So kids, we got to remember this. Kids will naturally compete if you let them. And a lot of great competitors were made on those sandlots or in this case, a parking lot. So when you introduce competition or being competitive, we all have to remember as parents, there's already an element of that there. It's about cultivating that element, bringing it out of the kids in a way that's not going to create massive anxiety, massive fear, right? I'm just kind of equating this to the whole show. That's the turn, I think, where coaches lose kids, right? Where, okay, you're competing for just a spot, which is a thing. Don't get me wrong. But the pride of competing for that spot and understanding that. So I want to go over today with the great Mike Benelli. I left the pause there for effect.
Yeah.
About
or editing
or how to keep it competitive while having fun. And Mike, let's start again. We're right at the start of the season. Let's get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, okay. We'll just preface it too by what age are you at, right? Because we want to be, we want to. I just think I think even at the earliest, the youngest ages, the kids are actually as competitive, but they don't know how to they don't know how to control that competitiveness. Right. So because sometimes it looks like cockiness, or it looks like arrogance, or it looks like bullying. But sometimes it's not. It's just listen. If you're blessed to have a competitive child, like a kid that's like almost like to the point where they're crying if they lose, like that people say, oh, look at this kid, what? But if you really look at those kids, like when I see those kids later on in life, I want that kid. Like I want that kid that's like that can't control their emotions, and then you can teach that kid how to control their emotions, and hopefully it becomes, manifests itself later on in a different way. Not slashing a stick over somebody's head, but actually, fighting for a spot when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. But you could start judging those kids and seeing those kids. So if you're a coach juggling, the competitiveness, and then educating your parents and talking with your kids that we're in competition against each other. This is a sport. I mean, you have to compete, not to run away from it, but to build on it and to educate through it. And then we have to understand that we're working with children, and how to help them navigate this world, right? We see it in professional athletes all the time. Like people are shocked when they meet somebody they see on the ice. Like I'll just use an example in our area, in New York area, like a Jacob Trouba, who's known for his big hits and his just vicious hockey, out there and just not caring at all. And then you meet the guy off the ice, is like the nicest person in the world. And you're like, how do you do that? Like how can you be this? How can you be a warrior, for 60 minutes and be a cuddler for the rest? And that's where we're getting into right now, right? We're getting into a season that we want to create a competitive atmosphere, but at the same time learning and teaching that there's ebbs and flows of that, and there's times to do it and times that you have to tone down, and you have to learn how to control it as a coach and a player.
Mike, you just reminded me with Trouba. Some of our younger parents won't remember the great Stu Grimson, whose nickname was the Grim Reaper, because he was so tough on the ice. It was definitely an enforcer. And I remember towards the end of his career, he did this great commercial where he gets a phone call, and it's his kid, and he's in the locker room. He's acting all tough, and he has to sing the Itsy Bitsy Spider in front of the whole locker room. And it was a really endearing moment, but that commercial ended up really being true for most of the players in the league, that, off the ice, they're different people. And you're bringing up a great point, Mike. And this is definitely for the coaches and the parents listening. In hockey, we spend a majority of the time on skill sets, tactics, maybe even some team cohesiveness. It is coming to the forefront now that we had spent almost no time on the mental skills of the game. Now, with that said, it's out there. People know that, okay, this is becoming important, but it's still the early Wild West days of this. And you talked about it. Why are we not working on the mental skill sets? And one of them is, and this is something everyone listening can do, helping your kid harness their emotions, helping them harness their impulses. So, Mike, you made a great point. Sometimes you can get a kid who is just so out of control that it's almost, you might start thinking, man, I don't know how to handle it. I don't want this. When I see a kid that is really upset about losing and lashing out, as a coach, my job is to harness that emotion. And as you said, if I have a kid that hates to lose, I'll tell him or her, hey, I like that you don't like to lose as a coach. I actually love that you hate to lose, but You're letting the emotion control you instead of you controlling it. That's a really important lesson for a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, that you're letting the emotion beat you. You need to be in control of that emotion. And I'll tell you, I mean, amongst the pro athletes that I've met, I'm not going to even limit this to hockey, man, they are competitors. They hate to lose.
Well, you have to teach them too how to control those emotions, right? It can't be like it's just like anything else. Like, hey, Lee, you got to skate. You got to skate faster here, buddy. You got to skate faster. All right, coach, thanks. What would you like me to do? Like, I think I'm skating fast. Right. So, hey, you have to control your emotions. Okay, great. But I'm 8.
How?
So what tools do you want me to do? And mom and dad can't control their emotions. If you've seen them in the stands, they're out of control. Right. So there's so much, there's so, and again, your task, I mean, we're all just volunteer dads and moms. I mean, we're literally getting out of work and we're being asked to be psychologists. Right. But there are tools, there are ways to use what's out there. People like yourself and getting, if you're really truly coaching young kids and you want to get the best out of them and you want to be a teacher and you want to be a coach, then, it's kind of falling on you to learn, how to help harness those behaviors, whether that's fair or not. It just is what it is. Or you just have out of control kids and get a miserable season and let it, and then quit at the end of the year. But I think it's just, but again, it's your obligation to learn how to harness those things. Can we all do it perfectly? No, but I think there's, like I said, if you want that emotion, because I want that emotion personally. Like I want kids that are emotional, especially if they're a really good player, like skilled player. But if they're, if you're trying to build a team around kids that are like-minded, emotionally invested kids, then you got to teach them the tools, to harness those emotions.
Well, Mike, I'll give you a great example of kind of the opposite of this. And this might be surprising to people. So I was coaching a team, high-level team. I have to say that for a reason, because these are adults I was coaching, where everyone got along. I mean, it was actually a really beautiful locker room. It was a wonderful place to be. And everyone got along all year. Now, if you're listening, that sounds like, oh, okay, well, it must have been a good season. It was an okay season. The problem with everyone getting along is nobody pushed each other. So, I was at a few practices and guys were not going after rebounds and everyone's just like, oh, it's okay. All right. And I'm like, I'm not okay with that. And there wasn't that player or players to say, hey, finish the rebound. Right. Now, coming back to competition, there's a lot of ways to describe competition. You want that coach or player that's going to challenge the teammates or the players to get to the extra mile. I've talked about it on the show before. The Nathan McKinnons, the Sidney Crosbys, the Michael Jordans, right? When you get behind the scenes, you find out how fierce these guys are. They don't stop, even with their own teammates. But we say it all the time, iron sharpens iron, steel sharpens steel. You need that level of competitiveness and emotion and just raw, I want to compete to succeed. So I always found that fun. I wanted someone to push me, right? Now, kind of bringing the show back to youth hockey now, right? I want to talk about ways you can implement these within your team, especially at the start of the season. Because, again, Mike, you and I talked in the pre-show about, there's these teams that start 0-12 or they start 12-0, and then you try and ride that the whole year. And it's the skill sets, the mental skill sets haven't been developed because you're riding an emotion, right? So when I bring a team in, I want your thoughts on this too, Mike. You almost have to explain, and this goes with everything we talk about with trust, accountability, these kind of high standards. You always want to explain what high standards are at every level, right? Again, a might team is going to have less of them. It might just be 2. Then a junior team might have 15. I mean, it doesn't matter, but you got to establish them. But then you should also describe and establish what is competition, and that you want your athletes to challenge each other, and that's going to be fun. And that we're going to put you in situations where it'll be fun to challenge each other throughout the season, whether it is a basic scrimmage or a small area game in the corner or a kind of ridiculous game like dodgeball on the ice. We're going to cultivate competitiveness as a skill. This is something every coach can do, right? And you'll know who your competitors are. And if you're a great coach, you'll help cultivate that competition in the ones that aren't competitive, right? Because every kid is motivated a little bit differently. And I'll call it the Pearl Harbor effect, probably not the best term, but the idea is you want to wake up the sleeping giant sometimes. And sometimes you never know what kid that's going to be. There might be the quiet kid in the corner that's got a lot of rage inside. Again, not going deep into that. But my point is, as a coach, as a parent, as a teammate, you can cultivate, hey, we want to be competitive all the time. We want our practices to be competitive so the games are easy, right? Mike, start of the season, this is something to look at, right?
Yeah, well, listen, it's the reason why the small area game phenomenon has developed over the last 10 years, right? Because flow drills and passing drills that end in the corner of the rink, or that you're going against a cone and not a player, all these different aspects of teaching. If you teach not to compete, then how do you expect a player to compete? Right. So if you go into the season and you're like, man, our kids just don't battle. Like you haven't done a battle drill in 20 weeks. Like of course they don't battle. It's because they don't know to battle. Like, and I think but mentally too, like just understanding that if you want to, you can create and cultivate a competitive environment. And I know the guy I work with, Wally Kozak, a lot. He's a mentor of mine, and Tim Bothroll, and they'll say, well, I use manipulate a lot in the my youth hockey verbiage, and they'll always correct me, like you're influencing, you're not manipulating.
I say I Miyagi them. I use the Karate Kid terminology.
I can manipulate a youth hockey's competitiveness by saying, okay, it's don't forget, guys, it's 6-5. There's only a minute left. They're like, what do you mean it's 6-5? It's 12-0. No, it's 6-5. And then I'll just say it's 6-5. And then and they'll fight a little bit, but then they're like, oh my God, it's 6-5. And all of a sudden they'll compete and they'll want to kill each other out there. And I think that's so to me, to influence that as a coach is really how I want to start. Getting out of the gate. Because if I want my kids to be competitive, and you can do this in games too. If you're in a season at the beginning right now and you're blowing teams out, and you just decide, well, we're just going to blow teams out without any structure. You're beating the teams. You can now put in a lot of roadblocks and a lot of things in there to force the kids to be competitive. They won't like. You could add, you must pass to the defenseman twice in the zone. You could bring in that if a forward, if we cannot make a forward pass, or there's all kinds of things you can do to influence and manipulate and Miyagi the situation to form competitiveness. Because if you're in a season right now where you're like you think it's actually a benefit to you that you're beating teams by 8 or 9 goals, then you're losing sight of what your job is as a coach and really where the season should go. So if you're a parent and you're in the car with your son right now or daughter, like, well, we've just won 9 games in a row. We've crushed the competition by 10 goals every time. Well, then you're in the wrong league. Then you're playing the wrong kids. You're not an elite. You're not. You're just not. I know you're not. You're not a team that can't be touched. But what you need to do then, if that's your situation, coach, you got to find a way to compete. Because when you get through these easy times, and then all of a sudden you get into a competitive atmosphere, and your kids don't know how to compete, or they're like shocked, like what. I know you as a coach too, right? Sometimes you like as a coach when you're on a winning streak to get knocked around a little bit right before you have to play in big games.
Yeah, I do.
It reminds players that you have to compete. It's not going to be easy. Like sometimes you're like, oh, thank God we didn't go on that 20-game win streak before the end of the season tournament. Because we did, we're getting knocked out in the first round.
I mean, look at Boston last year. I mean, look,
any President's Cup winner, right? Any President's Cup winner.
It's a kiss of death.
If it's too easy, it's not a light switch. Competition, I believe this. It's not a light switch. Even the most competitive people in the world can't, and that's a negative and a positive, right? The most competitive people in the world are competitive all the time. They're always on. Like they're playing chess. They're on. They're throwing the chessboard across the room. Like so, they're on now. Whether it's negative or positive, I don't know. That could be another discussion. But so you want to as a coach, you want to keep it on. You want to keep even if the kids know. Like my lacrosse kids used to hate me because, well, for probably a lot of reasons. But number one was because if we were beating a team, I forced them to do things that they were uncomfortable doing.
Yeah.
Which allowed teams without embarrassing the other team, force them to do things that they were like I might say, okay, all the righties must pass and catch lefty. You must. Now it's hard to do that in hockey, but in lacrosse you can do it. Right. Like you must be on your left side. Oh, I can't do it. Like,
good. That's
the
the
whole
point.
idea.
Yeah.
And you're not embarrassing the other team. You're just sharpening yourself. But you as a coach can influence, manipulate
Yeah.
Miyagi, those situations. And you as a parent, if you have a player that's that much better, you should embrace the fact that a coach doesn't want them to score 8 goals in a game at will. That's going to say, hey, you've got to help me and make these situations harder for yourself to get better. And so that's where I think, competition and making competitive players and athletes is so many different pronged approach.
You're making me think of a lot of things here. So I want to tell everybody listening again, look, everything Mike is saying is true. And you can add in kind of the age appropriate drill sets for this, right? One of the things I always find funny, Mike, is, if I'm at a practice for younger kids, and I'll just say younger, the younger half of youth hockey, and it's sluggish. Some coach will be like, yeah, guys are dragging today. And look, sometimes you got to practice at 5 p.m. on a Friday. That's likely, right? So instead of being upset about it, you know what I start doing? All right, we're going to do kind of one-on-ones or races, and you watch how fast they start skating. Especially at the youngest age. You really want a kid to move, put that kid against another kid. All right. Also, it's kind of a disclaimer. There might be a kid who's not succeeding at that every time, and they might get upset. This is an opportunity for you as a coach and a parent to talk to that kid. Yes. But did you see how hard you skated to try and catch that kid who's a year older than you? Man, I really loved your effort. Your effort's pushing you to be further. That's a message, believe it or not, you can give at any age. That's a little more.
That's why families that have big, like I grew up in a big family. Like I had 3 brothers that I always compete. Like it's like it was bloodbath. I mean, it was like so my mother would come in like, who broke the bedroom door? Like, why is the bedroom door off the hinges?
What door?
We were wrestling.
What
and
door?
We got a little
door there.
Now we don't. Then my father would be like, well, now we don't have a door. That's all. But so I think, but you're absolutely right. Like you can take the runt of the litter and bring them in and give them something that they could be good at, or give them some positive feedback as to what they are doing well, right, and then to really encourage them to continue to do that.
Right. And look, I don't think that happens enough, to be fair. And again, look, if you're one coach with 10 kids, it can be hard. If you're 2 coaches with 20 kids, it can be hard. But this is something you want to filter in, even if it's just after practice. Like, look, you didn't win a race today, but man, you were moving, and it's going to pay off. And it kind of want to turn this into this too. I've seen teams where they have a great goalie. The goalie is just best in the league, and the whole season it's like, well, we just got a great goalie. That goalie is a tool. There needs to be a conversation with that goalie of, hey, we're going to have our guys shoot on you harder than in games because you're going to make them better shooters, and in turn, they'll make you a better goalie. Sometimes it's not always 50-50 in terms of the balance, but iron sharpens iron, right? So if you can make your team, and I'm going to say it in a positive way, competitive at your practices, and explain to them what competition is and why we're going to compete against each other, and we want it to be fun. Maybe even keep a standing system, whatever you got to do that's appropriate for your group and their mentality. It's going to do wonders in the game. Mike, you talked before about winning streaks. I've always said a team is the most vulnerable during a losing streak and a winning streak. You are equally vulnerable at both of them because it just takes a little bit of turn to turn your mentality off if you're not prepared. And like I do things that are unorthodox. When we're in the middle of a winning streak, I'll have a meeting with the team. Hey, what are we going to do when we lose? I'll say it right in the room. You guys are like, you can't talk about losing. No, I can, because it's going to happen if we don't talk about it. So what are we going to do when we lose? And just to hear them talk about, well, we got to mentally be right back the next game. We got to do this. We can't change too much. Or adversely, losing streak. Hey, what are we going to do when we win? You know what's funny about losing streaks, Mike? And this kind of plays into the episode. When you're in a losing streak, the mental side of it is you're asking the wrong questions. When I see teams in losing streaks, the questions typically are, well, why can't we win? It's a horrible question. It's not a good question. You're not going to get a good answer to that question. Or, why are we not scoring more goals? They're weak questions, right? You got to dive deeper into the level of the team of, okay, what are the skill sets I need to work on right now that we're lacking that could develop into something good? What are the mental side? What are we fearing right now? What is fearful in our mind that it's not allowing us to compete? These are thought-provoking questions. And if you get the team thinking, things start to change. Losing streaks or winning streaks, you're in the same mindset every single day. All right. Even pros know they're going to lose. All right. And look, I don't know how many movies need to be made about this. I don't know how many situations have to happen where you see a team on a 20-game losing streak lose to the middle of the ground team just because they're really, really hungry. Right. And the other team, oh man, we're down by 2 goals. That hasn't happened since October. What do we do? It happens every year. Every year. The team
The
that's
best
mentally
is like
prepared.
in the between period. It's always like, we're better than these guys. They're not
Yeah.
as good as I go. Well, they're clearly better than you because they're beating
Today.
finals.
Yeah.
So they are better than you. But but again, those are looking for excuses. Oh, they're not as good as us. They're not. Well, not okay. Let's forget about that. What are you doing? Forget about what they're doing. What are you doing? Are you getting? Are you? Can you get pucks in deep, even if you don't like that philosophy, and change the momentum of the game? Change the way you're playing so that you can catch up and then recoup and then gain confidence. Like we all see it in games, right? That confidence is contagious. Like doing the right thing and building momentum. It's like back in the day when somebody'd have a really big hit and all of a sudden, like when I would teach like checking and body contact clinics, it was always like, 15, 20 years ago, it was, well, why do we body check? Well, intimidation and changing the momentum of the game.
Absolutely
when I was coaching, as a college coach, it was like, okay, we are going to lay out the most vicious hit we can right now. We're going
to game with that.
Momentum.
You'd want to start the game with that.
We're going to build our momentum. So what can we do differently as players now to just create that, that the ability to compete the whole game? Well, let's just win these little battles and they add up to big battles, right? I know we played, I know it was funny. We played a prep school game one time where against an opponent that had beaten us like by 8 goals every time they played us. And okay, I said the whole game, we're just going to get the puck and ice it. Win the face off. I don't care if you have possession, ice it. Well, coach, what about no, ice the puck? We're playing the long game here. And that game probably took 3 hours, but it was, we iced the puck and we did lose. We lost 1-0, but we were in the game the whole time. The other team lost their mind. And people are like, oh my God, Mike, what did you do to the team? I go, we didn't do anything. We played to our lowest denominator. But at that point I was trying to gain confidence. Not in that game. I didn't think we'd ever win that game. But I was trying to gain confidence in the future games. So just getting the kids to buy into something that worked for me allowed me then to introduce other things down the road, knowing I was going to take the loss, but I can control that whole time. Like that whole time was talking about, hey, look what you did there. That's the right play. Look where we are right now. End of the first period. You know where we were at the end of the first period last game? We were down by 7 goals. Right now we're down by 0. It's 0-0. So, as a coach and as a player and as a parent, we're in the beginning of the season. You've got to find all these little strategies to get to the end game. And what's the end game? The end game's not until March.
Right.
It's we are so long ways away.
It's a lifetime.
Season ending, whether it's a positive or negative experience, that we can manipulate, control and Miyagi all these things for our kids, because these kids are 9 and 10 and 8 and 11 years old. They shouldn't be that hard to fool, right? So so we can do that with them every day. We get them in practice and in games, and sometimes coaches in games, the game's coming up. Where you could play these games, right? With the kids, where you could push envelopes, going into a game, whether or not you could try different things to keep the game closer to manufacture stress, to manufacture kids fighting on the bench. Like sometimes I'll play games early in the youth hockey season where I'll do things where I want to see which kids are going to break. It's kind of like a Navy SEAL philosophy. Like I want to see who's going to break first on holding this 200-pound log. Right. Is it going to be you? Who's going to break first? And and then you put this kid here and put this kid here and say, okay, who's going to now beat up on this kid? Get all those things out of the way now. Yeah. Now is the time you want to know who your kids are and what the makeup of your team is.
You want to know for 2 reasons. One, you want to know who's going to be there at the start, and then you want to know who you're going to have to coach, and that's part of the job that's not doing it, right? And look, we have all youth coaches have all had a kid who started the season, and even you might have gone as coach of, oh, this kid's going to be a lot of work. And then at the end of the season, that kid is the one that gets the game winner or has the breakout in the playoffs and does everything. And it's because of your 6 months of work or 6 months of putting that kid in the right position. Adversely, there's a kid who starts really hot and cools off, right? So this is all part of that. I'll say Miyagi. We're not going to title this episode "The Manipulation of 9-Year-Olds," but it's all part of it, right? Is understanding how to do that. I wrote a couple notes here, Mike, especially at the start of the season. For your kids, for parents listening, get to know your teammates, get to know who kind of matches, whether it's a yin yang or kind of same space type of thing, who fits well with your kid, right? And then can they challenge each other? I know right now it's actually really funny. On my son's squirt team, him and this other kid, they're really good friends, but they started out as enemies. I remember they were pushing and fighting every day, and like coach had to separate them a few times. Now they're like best friends on the team, and they push each other. And I have been told by this young man's parents that scoring on my son is like one of the biggest goals he has at practice or like in a rec game is scoring on my kid. Adversely, what do you think my kid wants? He wants to save it. It's a great relationship. And afterwards they play games together. They love each other. They're friends. It's a great competitive relationship. I actually hope selfishly that I can create that with my daughter and my son. Where I can get to a point where I can say when they're pissing me off, hey, go downstairs in the basement, just go shoot on each other, have some fun, leave me alone. No, you got to cultivate these things. Now, again, listen, there may be some people listening that go, well, that's kind of harsh. That can be tough. Real life is going to be way tougher than any youth season your kid's going to have. All right. And if you can help build these skill sets, I always like to bring the ROI of hockey back to the life lessons. All right. This stuff all translates, to high school, college, work, whatever it is, whatever your kid decides to do after 18, all of this stuff. And if you're doing it for 10 years, they will be infinitely more prepared for the rigors of the real world. Now, if you don't challenge them, if you don't allow them to compete in the right way, if you protect them too much, we all want to protect our kids, including me. All right. This is where you develop massive anxiety, fear of failing. They get out in the real world and they cannot handle it. And again, Mike and I have seen this, all right? Not wishing that on anybody. I'm not calling anybody weak, but I'm saying that the skill sets you can learn to be competitive, to deal with adversity, to overcome large obstacles, which is another definition of adversity, directly translates. I'll give you another one, Mike. You talked about that the score being 6-5. One of the things I implement with a lot of teams, hey, the score is always 0-0, always. That has got to be your mentality. I don't want you to think you're down by 3 goals. And I don't want you to think you're up by 3 goals. The score is nothing, and you got to find a way to win this game. And that's one of the things I use, whether we're losing or winning the game, to keep the competitive level up. Because there's a mental side to competition. I've seen teams relax and lose games. Every second you're on the ice, I mean, you pay a lot for it. You might as well utilize as much time on the ice to develop something, right? And again, you said it before, your ability to create competitive things. Move your D to forward, move your forward to D if you can, right? Have 2 goalies in the net. Find different ways to challenge your team, right? Beyond the skill sets that you have to teach. Don't get me wrong, I'm not negating that, right? You have to teach skill sets. Sometimes you just have to do a basic station where you're teaching something. But the more ways you can, how about this? Creating creative competition. There's a nice little way of looking at it. I think we just donned that word. Competitive creativeness into your drills. You can find little things of, okay, there's going to be a race. There's going to be a challenge for the puck, right? We're going to keep score. Oh, another one. I'm sorry. You just reminded me of this one, Mike. I wrote a note here. I want to talk about it. One of my favorite drills that I did when I was coaching college was I wanted to recreate the urgency of kind of a close situation, but I wanted to tactically practice on a full zone, right? So I didn't want to just make it a small area game where it's just very fast. So I created a drill called the 1-minute drill. Obviously based off the 2-minute drill in football, but basically I would put 5-on-5, or maybe it was a penalty kill. I'd give them 1 minute, and there was an objective, right? The objective might have been something as simple as hey, tie the game, or I got this from playing video games. This is funny. I got this from Madden and all these games I used to play. But there would be an objective of hey, hit this guy or score a goal, or defense, you have to clear it 3 times within 1 minute. The feedback I got at the end of the season on that drill, they loved it. It was their favorite drill of the year because I was recreating a game scenario and the stakes were high. Sometimes I'd say you got 30 seconds, right? But we practiced these high intensity, high stress situations. And man, they were harder on each other than it happened in games. And I'm telling you right now, Mike, when we got into games in those situations, man, they were prepared. They executed heavily in those situations because we practiced it, right? There was
Yeah, well,
never.
I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
we see it forever, right? In football, you play the loudest music you can in the stadium, and crowd noise, and hockey coaches have done this for ages, right? Just creating like really stressful, high intensity environments, and trying to make it as loud and as much chaos, and just adding those in. So when it does happen, okay, it's not the big deal. There's that's why the 2-minute drill was invented, right? That oh well, it's no problem. We have all the time in the world. We know our cadence. We know how much area we have to cover, and we know what our skill set is. So I think anytime you can do that, it just comes down to basic,
Right.
Building competition into your practices so that the competition in the games are not as hard, and then having all the pieces in place so that when they do get hard in the real life in games, that they're recognizable. Like, okay, well, we've been down by a goal with a minute left in the game. It's why, like, you look at Quinnipiac University, where Rand Pecknold had so much confidence pulling his goalie with 3.5 minutes left in the game. Right. He's like, well, we've been here a lot, actually, and this is what our metrics are telling us is going to help us. The kids bought in, said, okay, I'm not afraid that there's no goalie in the back of the net, because this is how we're going to play this. Right. And we're going to get an opportunity to score. So it's all about, but again, he didn't just come up with that at the spur of the moment, on the bench. You talk to the kids that scored the game winning goal. Like, we've worked on that play 1,000 times. Like, we worked on that play 1,000 times. It wasn't like, oh my God, he came out of nowhere with this unbelievable idea. No, we've ingrained it in our brains and in our muscle memory, and we could do the same thing with competitiveness. If you want kids to come out of the corner with the puck, then put them in situations every day in practice where they got to come out of the corner with the puck. And if they're not coming out of the corner with the puck, and they're slouched and bad body language, then you need to change and fix that so that at some point they can and feel what it feels like to get out of there.
Well, and I'll tell you, Mike, another tip for that scenario, and I do this with off-ice drills too. So again, for those of you listening that are coaches and parents, this is an important one. I purposely create drills sometimes where they can't succeed. Right. And so, some people think that's cruel, but no, I'm trying to teach them something. You're not always going to succeed. All right. Now, a lot of the team building drills I do off ice, there's an objective, and you can complete some of them. Some of them, the objective is get the fastest time possible. So you're inevitably going to fail. There's inevitably a point it comes down to milliseconds. And I will give them 3 or 4 chances. And sometimes I'll stop the drill. Like, that's it today. But we didn't do it. No, you didn't. That's okay. Sometimes you don't succeed. Sometimes you fail. And you know what? What do you think builds in that, Mike? Hunger. And you know what? The next off ice, hey, can we do that drill again? No, not today. We're going to do that again in a few weeks. Hunger, competitiveness. And when we get to it, man, they're ready to do it. But I purposely do drills and I explain it to them. You might not succeed at this today, and that's okay, because sometimes that's the way things are in life. It's how you're going to return to it. Another pro sports story real quick. And I'm going to get some eye rolls from the crowd, but this is a really good story, and I want you all to hear it. The Philadelphia Eagles, the year they won the Super Bowl, converted more 4th downs than any other team, I think, in NFL history that season. And I remember announcers being like, wow, the Eagles just fearless this year on the 4th down, which you don't hear about. The Eagles, the prior season, where they didn't win anything, attempted more 4th down conversions and failed the previous season than the season they won.
Yeah.
All right. And Coach Peterson, who was there at the time, talked about that. We've been practicing this for 2 seasons, and it's paying off now. Right. Nothing, or I should say, very rarely do you see something at a pro level that was as miraculous as you think. And don't get me wrong, I'm not taking away from any great moments in sports. Most likely it was practiced and prepared in any scenario. Right. And that's what I think we're trying to talk about with competitiveness. You can teach competitiveness, but you can't teach it the final week of the season. You start with it now. Right.
Yeah. And it's a story that we have to remember. You just talked about a 2-year process. College could be a 4-year process.
Yeah.
You cannot hang your hat on a 2-week process. Don't worry about these next 2 weeks. If your coach is communicating and they have a plan, and you join them because they had a plan, and there's something there that you believed in, then don't worry about 2-week windows. And I think that's what we all fall into at the youth hockey world is we win the weekend tournament, we lose the weekend tournament. Everything revolves around that tournament. And this is a long game. It's a long-term play. And if you want competitive athletes, you have to allow them to go through that long-term play. And I think we all look at trying to fix that in very short windows, and we just do more harm than good, way more harm than good. And I don't know. It's just that's a great analogy. It's a great story though to understand that all that failure led to the ultimate success. And none of those players would say, "Oh, well, yeah, I would." If you could just if we could converted all the first downs and lost the Super Bowl, that would have been a great victory for us. They'd be like, "What are you crazy? That of course it was. Who cares? Who cares?" Yeah. And like the same thing, So okay, if you're a coach right now, like a 18U team or 16U team, you don't care about winning games. You care about your kids going somewhere. If you're a coach of an 8U game, you shouldn't care about only winning games. You should care about your kids being 9U players, right? So it's all those little things that we talk about a lot on this show about the long-term success and waiting it out. But that all stems from is the job that my coach is doing and the program and me as a parent, making sure my kid is just showing up every day and competing, being motivated, having fun, obviously. But I think in this particular discussion, and you said at the beginning, competing is fun. Yeah. And if you're competing and battling, even in loss, it's fun. That's why old men play tennis and pickleball, and because you can compete and you lose, you're like, okay, well, I'm still alive and that didn't kill me, and I'm sweating, I'm dying here, but that was fun. I lost, but it was fun. And if you're a competitive person and you like the ebbs and flows of that, then you're going to embrace that. And and honestly, if your son and daughter are not competitive people and they don't embrace that challenge, they're probably not going to get very far anyway with the sport. I mean, they have to, so you need to hopefully have somebody there that can help encourage that and build on it and use it to your advantage. But again, if you don't have it, you don't have it.
Yeah, you can't force it, right? And again, a lot of times it develops later on. Like that's the other thing. It's a good point.
Right. Well, that's the long-term piece, right? Don't worry about today. Hey, listen, if you maybe you're going to find that one kid that spark that does something for that kid, or maybe that person is going to go through something in their life that drives them a little harder, or gives them that extra motivation. We just don't know.
Yeah, and
so let's just
can't put it in them. Yeah, you can't put it in the kid. You have to draw it out, and most of the time it'll happen. Right? You talk about pickleball, and every over the hill hockey mom and dad that plays adult league is just nodding in the car right now, going, "That's me." Yeah, no, I really love playing adult league. No, it's a long-term season, and this is a long-term podcast. So here's the deal, everybody. I know that you're starting with your new teams here, and we humbly request share this podcast with your friends and families on your new teams coming up this season. We're going to have some cool stuff this year. You all requested a QR code to share, so we're working on a little thing. We're going to put it on our Facebook group titled Our Kids Play Hockey, and we're going to get it out to you on the website where you can share Our Kids Play Hockey, or the Ride to the Rink, or Our Kids Play Goalie. I'm amazed at how much this podcast has grown over the 4 billion years we've been doing it since the start of COVID. Mike Bonelli, fantastic episode as always. Love doing this with you, man. And I'm Lee Elias. That's going to do it for this edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. Remember, all of our episodes are available wherever you listen to podcasts. When you have a wonderful week, if it's starting, have a wonderful season, and we'll be with you every single Saturday morning moving forward. Take care, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Our Kids Play Hockey. Make sure to like and subscribe right now if you found value wherever you're listening, whether it's a podcast network, a social media network, or our website, ourkidsplayhockey.com. Also, make sure to check out our children's book, When Hockey Stops, at whenhockeystops.com. It's a book that helps children deal with adversity in the game and in life. We're very proud of it. But thanks so much for listening to this edition of Our Kids Play Hockey, and we'll see you on the next episode.